And it was a 38-year survey of my work, and it was entitled, the title of the show was One Man Group Show. And the reason for that schizophrenic title is that my work changes every 3 or 4 years rather appreciably or drastically. And that's been my pattern. I have made my dealer very resentful many times for having presented him with the next wave when he would rather I would stick with what I was doing. But the reason for this schizophrenia, I suppose, is that I never felt comfortable ever since I was a student in any particular area. So my work changes not only in terms of concept and material, but even genre. I've focused on painting and drawing, off and on with sculpture, photography, and more recently digital prints. So there are some of each of those things in the current show, which is called Arguing the Landscape. Now, why argue the landscape? Isn't the landscape something we don't need to argue about? We argue about everything. Do we have to argue about the landscape? And my answer is yes, I don't have any other way of dealing with it. The landscape is a concept that we carry around with us. And I have found that the best thing you can do with it is to try to argue with it and to come up with a strategy of, if not opposition, at least something that challenges the assumptions about it. I think the proper term would be a disruptive relationship to the landscape. And in my case, the disruption is particularly about the concept of the picturesque. Now I'm supposed to advance this thing here. See, the picturesque. This is not one of my paintings. This is a Claude Lorraine, typical, I would say, picturesque landscape. It's got a big tree on the left, a little tree on the right, a little token folly, which is the little building up there. It's got some geese. It's got a wise man. It's got some dancing people. It's sublime, it's jolly, and it's picturesque. The picturesque persists, of course, down to the present. This is a typical example from online from just the other day. It's got the big tree, it's got what stands for a little tree, and it's got the distant vista in between. Now, this modality or this construction is about making depth of field. It's about carrying your eye from the foreground into the background. It's to keep you moving and to enrich the experience on the retina. This is something I did in a body of work that is not represented in this show, but a body of work on the landscape called Big Tree, Little Tree. And it's a composite photograph. Actually, it's not a composite, it's all printed on one sheet of paper, but it is pre-digital. There was no way to do this digitally when I made this, which was probably 1991. And so each of those is a contact print attached to glass and then exposed. Those are 35 millimeter contact prints. The one thing about all the contact prints is that they're all big tree, little tree formulations. In the middle is a 4x5 contact print of my own in the same mold as the big tree, little tree. Now there's a companion piece to this that is little tree, big tree. And it's got the little tree on the left and the big tree on the right. There are 44 different big tree, little trees here, and the companion piece has 44 different little tree, big trees. And they're all photographed out of books from the library at UCLA, where I used to teach. This is supposed to nail down the idea that this is a mammoth cliche. The picturesque is a mammoth cliche. And yet, we still love it, we still expect it, and photographers produce the big tree, little tree formulation in their hundreds every week. Sounds militant, I know. This is a big tree, little tree formulation by Edward Muybridge. Edward Muybridge was known mostly for making stop-action photos of people, but actually he was a very well thought of landscape photographer in his day, and he did a lot of work at Yosemite. And when Edward Muybridge would go out into the landscape to find an objective, something to photograph, he would take a crew along to chop down trees. And if you chop down all the trees on the left, you get a nice little tree, big tree configuration. And he actually did this. This is a tree stump, a tree called the Prometheus tree that was chopped down in 1964 by a geology grad student at the University of Utah in the Great Basin National Park. It was then a national monument. And this graduate student wanted to know how old the tree was. He thought it might be the oldest living thing on the planet. And so he asked if he could chop it down to figure out if that was true. And the Department of Land Management said, sure, go ahead. Those were the good old days. Now this is a point of pilgrimage to people who had wished that that tree had never been cut down. And I actually have a friend who leads little kind of group seminars and takes people up there, and they all, sit on the stump and think about the good old days. Now, why would I show you this bummer, or this bummer? It's because the picturesque embodies something about the politics of the landscape. Not only does it denote a kind of ideal of form that has been arrived at, but it also has to do with this. This is a proprietary landscape by Gainsborough, a picturesque. I call it proprietary because the people on the left are the proprietors of this property. And the picturesque, this particular picturesque formulation was invented so people could show off their holdings of land. It's like a still life of all your ermines and your jewels and your paintings that you're standing in front of until some damn artist paints a skull on the floor. So when this was shown in Ways of Seeing, this painting, it was shown with a sign attached to the trunk that said, "No trespassing." And why is that? Why should this elicit such a kind of a negative response? It's not that there's anything wrong with holding land, it's just that the idea of the picturesque goes along with an attitude about landscape which is called magisterial, or the mastery of the land. You master the landscape by being able to see it all. The distant view with the close holding, your tree, your dog, your gun. These are ways of coding ownership and proprietorship. So I had been reading John Berger's Ways of Seeing, and I'd been reading an essay by John Fowles called Seeing Nature Whole. And Fowles' essay was all about trying to preserve the wildness of the natural world and not seeing it as a place where you can identify everything, codify it, classify it, and then chop it down. So and I also had recently read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, and I had, the picturesque in my sights, and I was going to go after it. So, and why not? I mean, disruptive strategies are not only formal. Modernism tells us that we have to develop disruptive strategies of form. We have to think about the way the object is constituted and invent, or reinvigorate the visual form. But postmodern also told us, or informed us reliably, I think, theoretically at least, that we had to think of disruptive strategies in terms of context, in terms of politics or the social milieu, the thing that surrounds the artist, the thing that surrounds the art, from which today you can barely escape. There is a new form of critique that is called dialogic, which now tries to honor the object as an object and also think about its social context, rather than going one way overboard in the direction of supporting social context and thinking nothing about the formal concerns. So I would say that is, to my mind, a very copacetic way of looking at critique. Now, this is a painting from the show, and it was a series in reaction to the picturesque. And I called it Autochthonous Views. Autochthonous means indigenous. It's like the view of something from close up, as if you were, let's say, a worm or a rabbit or a lizard, or an indigenous person occupying the space without thinking about it as product, or without thinking about it as something you could exploit. It's just what is, without labels. So I try to do some label-free landscapes by taking very small sections of Arizona highway black and white photographs, postage stamp size cuttings, and using those as my objective so that they would be landscape, but they wouldn't have the general kind of picturesque cues. So there's a treeness there, there's a kind of a blueness there, there's a kind of a depth of field there, but you can't exactly say what is what there. It's a label-free landscape, hopefully. Some of them a little less label-free than others. This one's quite label-free, I think. And it was based on a very, very, very postage stampy sized picture from a very large photo. So it was a tight crop of a tree in the distance. It was a black and white photo. I interpolated the color myself. So that is the area of coloring mentioned there. This is one called Paria, which is a shot from the Paria River gorge. And it's a little bit more space clear. It has sort of depth of field happening from the lower green thing to the back green thing, but I'm not really sure what the green thing is. It looks a little bit like a tribble on the front there. I don't think it is a tribble, but it might be. And then this one is fairly hard to identify. This was a very, very close section of a photograph of several trees, but I wanted to get into something that would not be about the surface of the tree, but the core, the heart of the tree. And so this is actually called The Tree's Heart. That's the parenthetical title of this, The Tree's Heart. And it's definitely about a tree, but it's not about the surface. It's not about what you see. It's what about the tree. It's about tree the consciousness of the organism. This is the largest thing I ever did in that vein of the autochthonous landscape. This is an installation of a 57-foot drawing at LACMA in 1989, and that's how I used to look. Yeah, I was very tucked in. Okay, then the next thing I did after 3 or 4 years of doing autochthonous landscapes was the reverse. I used the distant view, the picturesque distant view, and instead of screwing it up by, blurring the edges of things, I decided to screw it up by blocking it out. So I put a screen that's painted on there. It's not like a physical screen. The painting is done in oil, and the screen is done in alkyd, but it's one plane. The first one I did, this is the first one I did, the landscape ran all the way underneath. And then I painted it out as a sort of an active subjugation of my own time, I suppose. And I never did that again, because it takes a long time to paint like that. And I had just learned to do it so I could do these paintings. So that's the only one that painting actually goes underneath of. Oh, the colors are derived from the local colors, two of them, the white and the green of the tree. And they are the same width as the stripes that the French artist Daniel Buren used as a wallpapering device to seal up the galleries he was given shows in. He didn't put anything in the gallery, he just sealed the doors with stripy wallpaper that was 3 1/4 inches wide each stripe. So that was a kind of an inside joke. This is the first time I ever tried to block anything out. This was several years earlier. This is 1972. These are postcards, 9 postcards that I got on my driving trip back to teach at Florida State in 1972. And when I got there, I didn't have a studio, so I started painting on found images. And I painted geometric primitives. These are the 9 geometric primitives I was using at that point. And they're in order, from circle to cross to triangle to square to teardrop to spiral to sine wave to mandorla is the name of that thing, and then the spire. So I did a lot of that kind of stuff, and then that eventually led to me doing from the mid 80s to the late 80s, the paintings like the one I showed you before with Mount Shasta, but this is Cape Hatteras. And as you can see, the color is derived from the local choices. And when my father, who's an engineer, saw these in my show in 1989, he said, "I really enjoyed your beautiful landscapes. I just wish you hadn't put those things in front of them." And I told him that, there's nothing in front of the picture, Dad. That is the picture. He was an engineer, very practical. There's another one. This one's called Red Mountain, Green Mountain. And it's another art historical reference. It makes reference specifically to the nicknames for Clement Greenberg and Rosenberg, the two kind of antipodal art critics of the New York school. Didn't really have anything to do with them otherwise, except I just liked the idea that one was called Green Mountain and the other one was called Red Mountain. All right, the next thing I did is I got my own cameras. And instead of using found photographs, because all of these are found photographs, I ripped off some of the best. And I hope I don't ever get sued. But I've covered my tracks pretty well. So I got my own cameras. I got a 4x5 and a Fuji panoramic, and I already had a Nikon view camera. And I went around to the interior west, the inland west, photographing endlessly and doing silver prints that were put together in the darkroom using particularly crafted photo easels with little cutouts on them. So that on this one, there are 16 contact prints of 35 millimeter film shining, the light is shining through a cutout of a little house form. And then there's a contact print of one of my own landscapes below. And so it should be clear that what I do is I mess with the landscape. I don't ever show a landscape, even my own landscapes, I never show my own landscapes unless I have screwed around with them, unless I have intruded on their sanctity, unless I have blocked them out, unless I have drawn on them or attached something to their surface. I'm not happy with a nice landscape. I just can't leave well enough alone. And so This is where this kind of drawing strategy comes from. Here's one with a kind of an acrylic. These are 8.5 by 8 by 10 photo papers, and so the scale of the acrylic add-on, you can sort of guess. They're really quite small and gem-like. And the acrylic sticks well to the photograph once you have a coat of, gloss varnish on it. Here's another mess with the landscape, and these are all contact prints. One from the panoramic, two from the view camera, the 4x5, and each one has something of a metallic nature attached in front of it to block it out. And this is called greens, because there are some metal leaves, glimpse, because there's a kind of a glimpse through the hole, and goblins. So it's called greens, glimpse, and goblins. This is another aspect of the landscape. In the current show, there are 4 different phases of landscape. And over the last 45 years, I've done 7 bodies of work that were landscape, actually 6, and one that's kind of an ongoing body of landscape, which I would call synthetic landscape. This is synthetic landscape. This was a still life setup I did and took hundreds of shots of it with the 4x5 and found one that I liked and interpolated a lot of these little geometric shapes that I love in alkyd paint. This is another synthetic landscape from quite a bit later, around 2000. The last one was from the mid-'80s. This is from around 2000. This is another synthetic landscape. You can tell that it's a landscape, but it's quite scrambled and variegated. And in this case, there are 66 different birds painted by 60 different modernist artists. So in the middle there, you can see an orange bird and an orange bird with blue wings. You got Diego Rivera on the right, Frida Kahlo on the left. In the lower right, there's a Keith Haring bird. At the very top, there's a Miro bird, and so on. I learned to emulate these most of them oil paintings, historical oil paintings, in acrylic in order to do this, because I was painting only in acrylic at this point. So these are really close. I got them real close, if I do say so. This painting took almost 2 years to do. But it was off and on. I did photographs also. During the 90s, I only made 4 paintings. They were complicated paintings like this. And in that period, I only showed photographs. Here's another synthetic landscape from the mid-first decade of the 2010s, 2007, I think this was. And another synthetic landscape. You can tell it's a landscape, but it doesn't have a lot of the other cues. And this is the first time where I used what I call the pendulum form. And the pendulum is something that has become increasingly a part of the work that I'm heading into now. The next body of photography started in 95, I think it was. The first body of photography was from 90 to 95. And this work went from 95 to 2000. And, oh, that's okay, that's okay. And it's composite photography. There are 3 of these in the show. I think there are 3, maybe 4. There, I think 3. Yeah, and the thing about these is that none of these people were there together. These are photographed using a tripoded, in this case, a panoramic, large format panoramic camera, over a period of an hour and a half in front of Yosemite Falls on a good day. That is, good sun and good water flow, and lots of people wearing white shirts. Now, this, as I said, this group of people, except for the 2 women in the center, never met one another. And of course, there's another woman, actually a girl of probably 10 or 12, who was all in black with white tennies, and she's on the left and the right. And the name of the picture is Dark Girl, because everyone else is adamantly white and wearing glaring white colors in front of a glaring white waterfall. So the way of constructing these things is to put them together on a photo easel that has a pattern, I call a hexane pattern of 5-inch squares. And they're all exposed over a series of different negatives. In this case, as I said, I think 12 negatives. And I take sections of various negatives to configure the abstract arrangements of figures. And the figures are almost always a geometric, centered, rectangular-ish group, as here. This is the picture of the close-up of the photo easel. Here's another rectangular group of 4 men who never met one another, and we're at the viewpoint of Half Dome at the top edge there of Yosemite, and it looks fairly normal in the top half, but if you look at the bottom half, there are 4 people and a dog in there, and they're in different phases of motion, and they're all kind of mix-mastered. As they move down, they become more and more scrambled. But the thing about these photos is you don't notice that at first. You think it's a normal scene, and then you don't. This is less symmetrical. The premise of this was people who dress alike. Couples who dress alike. You probably know some of them. Do you know couples who dress alike? So I found 4 couples dressed alike, and of course they were all there at different times. And then there was one guy on his own who had a schizophrenic shirt. That is the actual pattern of his shirt. It's a diagonal dark and light from his shoulder to his opposite hip. And he's bent over the tripod like a character out of a Thurber cartoon. I don't know if any of you remember Thurber, but he made all these pictures of people in the 20s. I wasn't there myself. People in the 20s, and everything had a bell-bottom trouser on it. And they all looked jolly and roly-poly and cartoony. So this is called Odd Man. And this is called the physics of light because it's got that sort of maverick beam of light coming in, because when I took the 4x5 dark slide and tried to put it back in the film holder, I lifted the film holder slightly and a little beam of light shot across the negative. And that was the only one of 15 negatives out of this shoot that had that beam of light, so I used it. And I thought it was like a happy accident that offset these shadows. This is called the physics of light. Then, during that period in the mid-90s to late 90s, I started loading circles onto the landscape, but I did it on small format 8x10 prints that are coated with several coats of gloss varnish. And then I would pour acrylic circles on glass, and I would pour hundreds of them until I got the right ones and of the right sizes, and I would peel them up and stick them together one by one on top of the circle, on top of the photograph, So this has a relief of about ½ inch of depth in the paint itself, otherwise it's flat. And these are pretty small, they're basically 8x10. But later, I got some mileage out of that in the prints I started in 2008, which are also in the current show. This print is not in there, I don't think. But they were based on an idea that I, as a child, was impressed. An early instance of what I would call aesthetic arrest, where I saw a picture explicitly. It was in a Bible study book when I was probably 8 years old. And I didn't do a lot of Bible study, but I did get a nice charge out of some of the pictures. And the one picture in question was an expulsion from the Garden of Eden, with the tragic duo on the right side looking over their shoulders in regret. On the left side, there was a verdant landscape in blues and greens, and smack in the middle was the whirling blade of fire, which was set there by you-know-who to keep them from going back in. And this was the loss of paradise. This was the Christian version of paradise being lost. And that very much impressed me in terms of its form as a child. The story, I don't think, it's like any story. I didn't even register it very much, but I did register the collision of this geometric hot thing with this virtual depiction of a green thing, which was the landscape. And the abstract versus the depictive. I didn't think of it in those terms then, but I know that when I would look at scenic landscapes in years after that, I would very often wonder what they would look like with that circle on top of them. That disruption, mainly because of the pleasure I recalled from having seen it and had this aesthetic experience in the middle of a Bible study class. And this was the first one of the series of prints, and it's called Sword. And it is that whirling blade of fire, as far as I'm concerned. And this was shot in Zion Canyon. You get the irony? And the rock form is called the Three Patriarchs. That's the real irony. This is called Beach with Beagles. There's a woman walking two beagles there, very small in the center, right in front of the rock. So this is typical of how I derive the color. All of the prints are black and white, and the color is only in the circle I overlay on there. And in most cases, the colors of the circle and the configuration are based in either the colors within the landscape itself, or they're symbolic of other narratives, or of narratives. In this case, it was about the blues of this spot on the Oregon coast and the color of the beagle dog. And if you know what a beagle dog looks like, that's its colors, at least pretty close. They're kind of red, orange, and white and black. This is called Pod, and this is a crowd of people in front of Cathedral Rocks in Yosemite. They had just gotten out of a giant tour bus that was gold, and so I put a big gold balloon there, and it had a lot of, I think they were Koreans, because there was Korean script on the bus, and they had bright colors, and they all stood together in a cluster like this, with one guy off camera taking their picture. So I was able to grab them right in the central axis of the photo. And I should say at this point that all the photos I make for this series are about the central axis, the axial center point. So you can see that here, and you can kind of see that here. They're not all, some of them are more relational like this, but a great many of them have a strong central axis. And the photos are always made with an opening in the middle, where I know I'm going to be able to plant that circle. Ordinarily, you wouldn't make a photograph like this because the center area is devoid of incident. The real retinal interest in this is in the group of people and the pinnacle. So all that stuff in the middle is just the area I was wanting to plug something in which case was this circle. Lately, I've started shooting what I would call urban landscapes. It used to be mostly in the national parks and wild areas, but I've started doing urban landscapes. And this one is actually the roof of a church with a denuded eucalyptus and a cell tower. And this one is called Church. And you can see that there is a little spot of green in the middle, just as a reminiscence of the life of the poor tree. Everything else is about radiation. urban landscape. I just shot this morning. This doesn't have the sun and light I want yet. I'm going to go back to this site a couple times in the next day and a half, try to catch the right light, but I know this is the composition. And you'll notice there's a mammoth area for that circle to go into. This will be called Morrow. Oh, well, there's another. This is a rock formation in Arches National Park called the Gunsight. So I put a target in the middle of it. And the name of the piece is 1,000 feet for obvious reasons. There's usually some kind of human element in my landscapes because, disruption is what we do. There's a human element. This one's called Real Leather. And it was a find. I never set these up. I never set up people, and I don't set up shots, and I don't do any digital rejiggering of the composition. I never Photoshop. I don't even own Photoshop. The only thing I do is flip to black and white. I up the contrast if I need to, and then I've got this proprietary program called OmniGraffle for doing the circles. So, a bereft IKEA couch. This one is called Strangelove. And if you know the movie Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, or something like that, these two guys were sitting in front of me during the entire time I was waiting to see Old Faithful go off speaking animated German. Back and forth and back and forth. And their wives were sitting on the bench in back right next to me. They had the rockers. The wives were back here, speaking German, of course, also. And the guy on the right his haircut looked like that Peter Sellers role of Dr. Strangelove. And the guy on the left looks like Peter Sellers' role of the president, if you remember the movie. So, of course, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. In the middle, the colors in the middle are those of the German flag. Something just tooted at me. Those are the colors of the German flag. It's symbolic color usage, and that's something a lot of people frown on, particularly committed abstractionists, but I'm only interested in the colors that I can extract from the narrative or the politics or the surface of the source picture. This is another one of the urban landscape pieces, and this is a digital print on canvas coated with several coats of varnish and then painted on with oil. So there are some color prints in the series. And there are also some oil paintings in the group. This is not a big painting, it's about 3.5 feet wide, about 5 feet high. And the oil paintings I do in this series, which is called Paradise, for obvious reasons, considering their derivation. Whoops. Oh, you know what? I know what that toot was about. We just ran out of power. But I don't know why this ran out.
Yeah, why would that run out?
Did we? It's there.
That's there, that's right.
We're almost at the end anyway. It tooted again. I think there are only 5 more shots, so I think we've done it. You can come up and look at it on the monitor if you want.
Is your mic still working?
No, it's out. I think we've had a...
Well, do we have any questions?
Yes. Any questions? I can be heard, believe me. No questions? Easy.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I noticed about the targets, the circles, how they vibrate. Do you do that kind of optical vibration?
I don't think they can help but vibrate. I think that's what circles do, concentric circles, and I'm definitely exploiting that feature. But the other thing they do is they have, I'm told they have a sound. And you saw that picture of the cell tower with the radiations coming out of it, which is like shorthand for, waves coming out from a speaker or something like that. The wave form of sound or the wave's form of light. And someone at the opening of this show of Prince came up to me, a woman I had known for a long time, and she said, these pictures make a sound. I said, they do. What is the sound? And she said, they hum. And I thought, right on. That was exactly right. And she's a sensitive. I've known her a long time. She's one of those women who sees things that a lot of people don't see or hears things. It's called synesthesia in some camps, I suppose. Different visions, creating different aromas or sounds. Synesthesia. These are pictures for synesthetes. I'm not one. My wife is, so anyway. Any other questions? Yes?
What's your method for creating those really large painted circles?
Yeah. Oh, that's what I didn't get to show. They're the last things on here. Those paintings, by the way, are derived from photos that I made at Yellowstone of thermal pools. So the high color one with all the spectral color is called Morning Glory Pool. And those are the actual colors. If you've ever been to Yellowstone, you're missing something big. And you better go before it blows up. It's going to happen within the next 300,000 years, so you better get there.
A guy just fell into one of those pools there, and they never found his body.
Oh, one of the pictures in the show is of Pork Chop Geyser. This is the place that some guy about a month ago went off the boardwalk, slipped, fell in, and he is gone.
Never found his body.
They have never found him. That is a wild place. That is nature as John Fowles wanted it to be seen, as something not tame, even though there's a boardwalk there. It's a wild place. You could be on a walk in the early morning, even on a boardwalk in Yellowstone, and encounter a grizzly. It's a wild place. Not as wild as The Revenant. The landscape of The Revenant was one of my favorite things ever in film, because it was the kind of landscape that didn't say, I'm a Teletubby, and everything is groovy, and everything is green. What it said is, I'm going to kill you! Any other questions? That's a good way to finish.
Thank you. Be sure to bring back your friends and your neighbors, bring them to the show for next month.